It started as a nagging feeling, one I couldn't quite put into words, but couldn't ignore either. He had mentioned her casually one evening, as we were clearing the dinner table. "There's a new colleague in the office," he said, his tone light, almost disinterested. "Her name's Ashley. She's nice." He didn't meet my eyes as he said it, focusing instead on wiping down the counter. I barely registered it at the time. After all, people come and go in workplaces. But then he added, "We've been grabbing lunch together sometimes. She's new, so I figured it'd be nice to show her the ropes." "That's thoughtful of you," I had said, genuinely meaning it. That was who he was, considerate, always willing to lend a hand. It was one of the reasons I fell in love with him. But now, sitting here in the suffocating quiet of our living room, those words replayed in my mind like a bad song stuck on repeat. It wasn't just the lunches. Over the next few weeks, little things began to pile up. She started liking his Instagram posts, not just the recent ones but old ones too. Pictures of our anniversary trip to the mountains, random photos of his car, even a blurry shot of the lasagna he made one night. Who scrolls back that far unless they're searching for something? Or someone? I told myself I was overreacting. Social media didn't mean anything. It was harmless, wasn't it? But then there were the texts. His phone would light up at odd hours, and he would glance at it, smile faintly, and set it back down without saying a word. When I asked who it was, he'd shrug. "Just work stuff," he'd reply, his tone easy practiced. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. But doubt has a way of taking root and spreading. And soon, I found myself scrolling through her Instagram page late at night, while he slept beside me. Her profile was public, filled with polished photos of her perfectly styled hair, her gym selfies, and filtered shots of her morning lattes. She was the kind of woman who wore confidence like a second skin. The kind of woman who could make someone like me feel ordinary. That's when the idea struck me. It was impulsive, reckless, and completely out of character. I created a fake profile, a faceless account with a generic name, and a picture of a golden retriever as the avatar. I followed her, half expecting her to ignore the request. But she didn't. Within minutes, I was in. For the first few days, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. She posted her usual content: a mirror selfie at the gym, a shot of her avocado toast, a motivational quote about seizing the day. But then, exactly 1 week later, she posted something that made my stomach drop. It was a photo of him. He was smiling, holding a cup of coffee, his tie slightly askew as if he'd just loosened it after a long meeting. I recognized the background immediately. It was the little cafe around the corner from his office, the one we used to go to together. The caption read, "My hero." My heart slammed against my ribcage. My hero. The words stared back at me, taunting me, daring me to confront the truth I had been trying so hard to avoid. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring with unshed tears, my mind racing. What did she mean by my hero? Was it a joke? A private reference I wasn't privy to? Or was it exactly what it looked like? Before I could stop myself, my fingers were flying across the keyboard. Using the fake account, I typed a comment beneath the photo. "Your hero or mine?" It was petty and childish, but I didn't care. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst as I hit post. The comment hung there for a few agonizing minutes before she replied. "Mine, obviously," she wrote, followed by a winking emoji. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. It felt like the ground beneath me had opened up, threatening to swallow me whole. How could he do this? How could he be so careless, so disrespectful? I closed the app and threw my phone onto the couch, unable to look at it any longer. When he came home that evening, I couldn't even bring myself to meet his eyes. He kissed me on the cheek, asked how my day was, and sat down at the table as if nothing had happened. I watched him from the kitchen, my emotions a storm brewing just beneath the surface. Did he know? Had she told him about the comment? Was he hiding something? Or worse, everything? I wanted to confront him, to demand answers, but a part of me wasn't ready. Not yet. Instead, I stayed up late that night, my mind spinning with plans, doubts, and fears. The picture of him smiling, so carefree and unaware, burned into my memory. The next morning, I woke up with a resolve I hadn't felt in weeks. If he thought he could keep secrets from me, he was wrong. If there was one thing I knew, it was that I deserved the truth, even if it shattered me in the process. I spent the next few days in a haze of doubt and anger, trying to figure out my next move. I watched him carefully, scrutinizing every word, every glance at his phone, every casual mention of his day. He seemed completely unfazed, as if nothing had changed, and that made it worse. How could he act so normal while I was drowning in suspicion? Was he that good at hiding things, or was I imagining it all? Ashley continued to post, but nothing as blatant as the photo of him appeared again. Still, she didn't delete it, and the comment I left lingered beneath it like an open wound, unanswered and ignored. Part of me wanted to leave it there as a reminder, to her, to him, to myself, that I wasn't blind. But another part of me wanted to delete the entire account, to pretend I had never gone down this rabbit hole. But I couldn't. I wasn't done yet. I decided to dig deeper, though it made me feel like a person I barely recognized. Late at night, when he was asleep, I'd scroll through her posts again, looking for patterns, clues, anything that might confirm what I was beginning to fear. She posted frequently, often tagging places in the city I recognized. Cafes, parks, restaurants. And then there were the stories, short, fleeting glimpses into her day that vanished after 24 hours. It was in one of these stories that I saw something that made my breath catch. It was just a video, a quick, shaky clip of her laughing as she panned the camera across a dimly lit bar. And then there he was, sitting across from her, his face illuminated by the soft glow of a candle. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was focused on something she was saying, smiling in that easy, familiar way that used to be reserved for me. The story disappeared before I could take a screenshot, but the image was seared into my mind. The next day, I casually mentioned the bar during breakfast. I was thinking about that little place downtown. The one with the candles on the tables. We haven't been there in ages. Maybe we could go this weekend. He looked up from his plate, surprised. Oh, I don't know if they're still as good as they used to be. I went there recently with some colleagues, and it wasn't great. He didn't even flinch. Colleagues, I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. Anyone I know? Just the usual crowd. You know how it is. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. My hands tightened around my coffee mug. He was lying to my face, and he didn't even have the decency to hesitate. I spent the rest of the day spiraling, torn between confronting him outright and continuing to gather evidence. The logical part of me knew I should stop, that this wasn't healthy, but the part of me that had been betrayed, that was desperate for answers, wouldn't let go. I needed to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. That evening, I logged into the fake account again and sent Ashley a direct message. It was a simple, innocent question, designed to draw her out without raising suspicion. Hey, I saw that post you made with the guy at the cafe. He's cute. Are you guys a thing? I waited, my heart pounding as the little typing indicator appeared on the screen. A moment later, her reply popped up. LOL, yeah, something like that. He's not technically mine though, winky face. The winking emoji made my stomach churn. Not technically hers. What did that even mean? Was she mocking me? Or did she genuinely not know about me? Either way, I couldn't let it slide. What do you mean by that? I typed back, trying to keep the tone casual. Her response came almost immediately. It's complicated. He's in a relationship, but he's not happy. We're just seeing where things go. Don't tell anyone, though. Don't tell anyone. The words made my blood boil. She had no idea she was talking to me, the woman he came home to every night, the woman who had stood by him through every high and low. I wanted to scream, to throw my phone across the room, to march into the bedroom and demand answers. But I didn't. Instead, I took a screenshot of the conversation and saved it. For the next few days, I couldn't look at him without feeling sick. Every time he touched me, every time he kissed me goodbye in the morning, I wanted to push him away. But I didn't. I needed to be sure. I kept messaging her, pretending to be the friend she thought I was, coaxing out little details about their relationship. She told me they met during her first week at the office, that he had been so kind and welcoming, that she couldn't help but fall for him. She described their lunches, their late-night texts, the times he'd stayed late at work just to keep her company. Every word was a knife to my chest, but I kept going, determined to learn everything. Finally, I decided I had enough. One evening as we sat down to dinner, I placed my phone on the table between us. "We need to talk," I said, my voice trembling. He looked up surprised. "What's wrong?" "I know about Ashley." The color drained from his face. For a moment he said nothing, just stared at me as if I had slapped him. Then he laughed, a hollow, nervous sound. "What are you talking about?" "I know about the lunches, the texts, the late nights. I know she thinks you're her hero." My voice cracked on the last word, and I hated how vulnerable it made me sound. His face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. "It's not what you think," he said quickly. "She's just a friend." "Don't," I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. "Don't lie to me. I've seen the messages. I know what's going on." He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't find the words. Finally he sighed and looked away. "It's complicated." I laughed bitterly. "Complicated? That's what she said too. So why don't you explain it to me? Make me understand how you could do this to us." The conversation that followed was one I would never forget. His excuses, his half-hearted apologies, his pathetic attempts to downplay what had happened. It all blurred together in a haze of anger and betrayal. By the end of it, I wasn't even sure what hurt more. The fact that he had done it, or the fact that he thought I would believe his lies. That night, I packed a bag and left. Leaving that night felt like stepping into an abyss. The air was cold, and every breath felt heavier than the last as I walked out the door with nothing but a hastily packed bag and a storm of emotions swirling in my chest. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do next. I just knew I couldn't stay. The home we had built together, the place that had once been my sanctuary, now felt suffocating, tainted by the weight of his betrayal. I drove aimlessly for hours, the roads blurring under the soft glow of streetlights. I thought about calling a friend, someone to lean on, someone to help me make sense of the chaos in my mind. But the idea of explaining what had happened, of hearing the pity in their voices, was unbearable. So I kept driving, letting the hum of the engine and the rhythmic beat of the rain on the windshield drown out the thoughts racing through my head. Eventually, I pulled into the parking lot of a small roadside motel. The neon sign buzzed faintly, casting an eerie red glow over the wet pavement. It wasn't much, but it was far enough from home that I felt like I could breathe again. I checked in without looking at the receptionist, mumbling something about needing a room for the night. The room itself was plain and unremarkable. A single bed, a tiny TV, a chair that looked like it hadn't been used in years. But it was quiet, and for the first time all day, I felt a small measure of peace. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall as the weight of everything began to sink in. The image of him smiling at her in that dimly lit bar played over and over in my mind, like a cruel movie I couldn't turn off. I thought about the way he had laughed with her, the way she had called him her hero, the way he had lied to my face over and over again. Every memory felt like a dagger, cutting deeper and deeper until I could barely breathe. At some point, I started crying, quiet, gasping sobs that shook my whole body. I clutched a pillow to my chest, as if holding onto something solid might keep me from falling apart completely. How had it come to this? How had the man I loved, the man I trusted more than anyone in the world, become a stranger? I had always thought we were stronger than this, that our love could survive anything. But now I wasn't so sure. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and an ache in my chest that felt like it might never go away. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, trying to summon the strength to get up, to figure out what came next. Part of me wanted to call him, to give him one last chance to explain himself, to make things right. But deep down, I knew there was nothing he could say that would undo what he had done. Instead, I opened my phone and logged into the fake account I had created. Ashley had posted another picture, this time of herself at a coffee shop, her smile radiant and carefree. The caption read, "Starting the day with good vibes and even better company," followed by a heart emoji. There was no sign of him in the photo, but I knew. I knew she was talking about him. My fingers hovered over the screen, tempted to leave another comment, to say something that would shatter the perfect little world she thought she had with him. But I stopped myself. What was the point? She wasn't the one who had made promises to me, who had vowed to love me and only me. That was him. She was just the symptom, he was the disease. I deleted the fake account right then and there. It felt like a small act of reclaiming control, of letting go of the part of me that had become consumed by suspicion and jealousy. But it didn't make the pain go away. It didn't erase the betrayal, or the emptiness I felt inside. Over the next few days, I tried to piece myself back together. I stayed in the motel, avoiding calls from friends and family, avoiding him. He texted me a few times, each message more desperate than the last. "Please come home," he wrote. "We can fix this. I love you." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that love was enough to fix what had been broken. But love without trust is hollow. And I didn't know if I could ever trust him again. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the rain, my phone buzzed with another message. This one wasn't from him. It was from Ashley. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it, unsure of what to expect. The message was short, almost flippant. "Guess you found out. Sorry if this complicates things for you." Complicates things. As if my entire world hadn't already been turned upside down. As if she had no part in the destruction of my marriage. I stared at the message, 1,000 retorts forming in my mind, but I didn't respond. What was the point? She didn't deserve my energy, my anger, or my pain. Instead, I turned off my phone and climbed into bed, letting the sound of the rain lull me into a restless sleep. I dreamed of better days, of the life we had before her, before everything fell apart. But even in my dreams, I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that it was all a lie, that the man I had loved was never really mine to begin with. When I woke up the next morning, something had shifted. The pain was still there, a dull ache that I knew would take time to heal. But so was something else. Determination. I didn't know what the future held, or how I was going to move forward. But I knew one thing for certain. I deserved better. I deserved someone who would fight for me, who would choose me, who would never make me doubt my worth. I packed my things, checked out of the motel, and drove away without looking back. The drive back to the city was quieter than I expected. No music, no podcasts, just the hum of the tires on the asphalt, and the occasional roar of passing cars. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I wasn't ready to go home. Not yet. Home wasn't home anymore. It was just a shell of what it used to be, filled with memories that now felt tainted. I ended up at a park on the edge of town, one we used to visit in the early days of our relationship. Back then, we'd come here on lazy Sunday afternoons, lying on the grass and talking about everything and nothing. The thought of it made my chest tighten, but I pulled into the parking lot anyway, drawn by something I couldn't quite name. The park was almost empty, save for a few joggers and an older couple walking hand in hand. I sat on a bench near the pond, watching the water ripple in the breeze, and tried to make sense of everything. Part of me wanted to hate him, to write him off as a liar and a cheat, and move on with my life. But it wasn't that simple. He wasn't just some boyfriend I could break up with and forget about. He was my husband, the man I had built a life with, the man I thought I'd grow old with. How do you let go of that? How do you walk away from someone who was supposed to be your forever? The sound of my phone buzzing in my bag pulled me out of my thoughts. I considered ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. It was another message from him. "I'm sorry," it read. "Please just talk to me." I stared at the words, my thumb hovering over the screen. What was there to say? What could he possibly say that would make any of this better? But before I could overthink it, I found myself typing back. "What do you want, Daniel?" His reply came almost instantly. "I want to explain. I want to fix this." Fix this. As if it were a leaky faucet or a broken chair. As if our marriage could be patched up with a few heartfelt words and a promise to do better. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him that some things couldn't be fixed, that some wounds cut too deep to ever fully heal. But instead I typed, "You should have thought about that before." The 3 little dots appeared, then disappeared, then reappeared. Finally his response came through. "You're right. I was stupid. I made a mistake. But it didn't mean anything. You're the one I love. You're the one I want." I let out a bitter laugh, the sound harsh and foreign in the quiet of the park. It didn't mean anything. How many times had I heard that excuse from stories like mine? How many people had clung to those words, desperate to believe them, only to be hurt again? Then why? I typed, my fingers shaking. Why did you do it? This time, the response took longer. I imagined him sitting there, trying to come up with the right words. The ones that would make me forgive him. Finally, the message came through. I don't know. It just happened. I wasn't thinking. But I swear it didn't mean anything. I never wanted to hurt you. I stared at the screen, my stomach churning. I never wanted to hurt you. As if that made it any better. As if the absence of intention could erase the damage he'd done. I didn't reply. I couldn't. I shoved my phone back into my bag and turned my attention back to the pond, hoping the sight of the water would calm the storm inside me. But the storm didn't go away. It stayed with me as I sat there, as I walked back to my car, as I drove aimlessly through the city. It stayed with me as I checked into another motel that night, and as I lay in bed staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering how I'd let my life come to this. The next morning, I woke up to find several more messages from him. Some were long and pleading, others were short and desperate. I can't lose you. Please come home. I'll do whatever it takes. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that he meant it, that he'd learned his lesson, that he'd never hurt me again. But trust isn't something you can rebuild overnight. It's not something you can fix with apologies and promises. And the truth was, I didn't know if I could ever trust him again. For the next few days, I avoided him entirely. I turned off my phone, ignored the emails piling up in my inbox, and spent my time walking through the city, trying to clear my head. I visited places we used to go together, hoping to find some clarity, some sense of what I should do next. But all I found were memories of laughter, of love, of a life that now felt like a lie. One evening, as the sun was setting, I found myself at the cafe where he and Ashley had been in that picture. I hadn't planned to come here. My feet had just carried me here without thinking. The sight of it made my stomach twist, but I forced myself to go inside. It was quiet, the soft hum of conversation filling the air as I ordered a coffee and sat down at a table near the window. As I sipped my drink, I thought about all the times we'd been here together, how happy we'd been, how certain I was that we'd always be happy. I thought about the first time he told me he loved me, how his voice had trembled just enough to make me believe he meant it. And I thought about Ashley sitting here with him, smiling at him, looking at him the way I used to. The thought made my chest ache, but it also made me angry. Not just at her, but at him and at myself for still caring so much. I didn't know how long I sat there, lost in thought, but eventually I realized I couldn't keep doing this to myself. I couldn't keep running from the pain, from the truth. I needed to face it no matter how much it hurt. And that meant facing him. That night I drove back to our house. The lights were on and his car was in the driveway. I sat in my car for a long time, my heart pounding as I tried to summon the courage to go inside. Finally I took a deep breath, got out of the car and walked up to the front door. When he opened the door and saw me standing there, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Relief, guilt, hope, maybe all three. You came back, he said softly. I came back to talk, I said, my voice steady even though my hands were trembling. That's all. He nodded, stepping aside to let me in. I walked past him into the living room, the familiar scent of the house washing over me like a wave. It felt both comforting and suffocating at the same time. We sat down across from each other, the silence heavy between us. Finally, I looked him in the eye and said, I need you to tell me the truth. All of it. No more lies. And so he did. The words came slowly at first, as though he was struggling to find a way to say them without breaking what little remained between us. He started with the familiar lines I'd already heard before. That it was a mistake, that he never meant to hurt me, that it didn't mean anything. But this time I didn't let him stop there. Why her? I asked, my voice steady, even though my insides were trembling. What did she give you that I didn't? He flinched at the question, as if the bluntness of it had caught him off guard. For a moment he didn't answer, just stared at the floor like a guilty child caught in a lie. Finally he looked up at me, his eyes full of something that might have been shame. It wasn't about her, he said quietly. It was about me. I frowned, not understanding. What does that even mean? He sighed and ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized as one he always used when he was frustrated or overwhelmed. I've been feeling lost, he admitted. At work, at home, everywhere. Like I'm stuck in this routine, and no matter what I do, I can't break out of it. And then Ashley showed up and she was new and exciting and, I don't know. She made me feel alive again. His words hit me like a punch to the stomach. Alive again. As if our life together wasn't enough, as if I wasn't enough. I wanted to scream at him, to throw something, to demand how he could be so selfish. But instead I sat there frozen, my heart breaking all over again. So what? I said, my voice cold. You decided to throw everything away for a little excitement? For someone who flirts with you over coffee and calls you her hero. It wasn't like that, he said quickly, his tone defensive. I wasn't thinking straight. I was stupid, okay? I let myself get caught up in something I shouldn't have. But it's over now. I ended it as soon as I realized what I was doing. When? I asked, narrowing my eyes at him. When did you end it? His hesitation was all the answer I needed. You haven't ended it, have you? I said, my voice rising. You're still talking to her. No, he said quickly, but the way his eyes darted to the side betrayed him. I mean, I might have texted her once or twice, but it wasn't anything. Don't. I interrupted, my voice sharp. Don't sit there and lie to me. Not anymore. He slumped back in his chair, defeated, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I haven't seen her since you left, he said finally. I swear. I told her it was over. I told her I couldn't do this anymore. But you wanted to, I said bitterly. You wanted to keep seeing her, didn't you? He didn't answer, but the look on his face told me everything I needed to know. The silence between us stretched on, heavy and oppressive. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like the walls of the house were closing in on me. I wanted to get up and walk out, to leave him sitting there with his guilt and his excuses, but I couldn't move. My legs felt like lead, and my heart felt like it had been shattered into a million pieces. Why didn't you come to me? I asked finally, my voice barely above a whisper. If you were feeling lost, if you were unhappy, why didn't you talk to me? Why didn't we figure it out together? I don't know, he said, his voice cracking. I was scared, I guess. Scared that you'd think I was weak or that I was failing. I didn't want to burden you with my problems. I thought I could handle it on my own. And instead you destroyed us, I said, the bitterness in my voice cutting through the air like a knife. He didn't argue. He just nodded, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of his actions was finally sinking in. I know I screwed up, he said. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I love you. I've always loved you. And if there's any way to fix this, to fix us, I'll do it. Whatever it takes. I looked at him, searching his face for some sign of the man I used to know, the man I had fallen in love with. He looked so small, so broken, and for a moment I almost believed him. Almost. But then I thought about Ashley, about the way he had smiled at her, about the lies he had told me, and the pain came rushing back, sharper and more relentless than ever. I don't know if I can do this, I said, my voice trembling. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. He reached for my hand, but I pulled away before he could touch me. The hurt in his eyes was almost unbearable, but I forced myself to hold my ground. I had to. I'll do whatever you need me to do, he said, his voice desperate. I'll go to therapy. I'll quit my job. I'll do anything. Just don't give up on us. I need time, I said, standing up. I need space. I can't make this decision right now. He nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. Take all the time you need, he said. I'll be here when you're ready. I didn't say anything as I grabbed my bag and walked out the door. The night air was cool against my skin, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like I could breathe. I didn't know what the future held or if our marriage could survive this, but for now all I could do was take it one step at a time. The drive away from the house felt both liberating and unbearable at the same time. I had stood my ground, demanded honesty, and told him what I needed. But now that I was alone again, the weight of everything came crashing down. I pulled over to the side of the road, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mind was a mess of emotions. Anger, sadness, confusion, and something else I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was relief. Maybe it was exhaustion. Or maybe it was just the beginning of acceptance. I sat there for a long time, staring out at the empty road ahead of me. The streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement, and the occasional car sped by, its headlights cutting through the darkness. I thought about turning back, about walking into that house and pretending everything could go back to the way it was. But deep down I knew it couldn't. Too much had happened. Too much had changed. Eventually, I started the car again and drove to a hotel on the outskirts of town. It was nicer than the motels I had stayed in before, with clean white linens and a little desk by the window. I checked in and carried my bag up to the room, trying not to think about how strange it felt to be staying in a hotel alone while my husband sat at home, waiting for me to decide whether our life together was worth saving. I dropped my bag on the bed and sat down at the desk, staring at my phone as it lit up with another message from him. I didn't open it. I couldn't. Instead, I opened the Notes app and started typing, pouring everything I was feeling into words that no one else would see. The betrayal, the pain, the tiny slivers of hope I didn't want to admit I still had. It all spilled out onto the screen in a chaotic jumble. Writing it down didn't make the pain go away, but it helped me make sense of it, even if only for a little while. When I was done, I set the phone down and stared out the window. The city lights twinkled in the distance, and for the first time in days, I felt a strange kind of calm. It wasn't peace exactly, but it was close enough. I climbed into bed and pulled the covers up to my chin, letting the soft hum of the air conditioner lull me to sleep. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing again. This time it wasn't him. It was my best friend, Melissa. I hesitated for a moment before answering, not sure if I was ready to talk to anyone about what had happened. But as soon as I heard her voice, the tears I had been holding back came rushing to the surface. "Hey," she said softly. "I've been worried about you. Are you okay?" "No," I admitted, my voice cracking. "Not even a little." "Where are you?" she asked. "Do you want me to come get you?" "I'm at a hotel," I said. "I don't even know why. I couldn't stay there." I couldn't look at him. "That's okay," she said. "You don't have to figure everything out right now. Just take it one day at a time." Her words were simple, but they were exactly what I needed to hear. For the first time in days, I felt like I wasn't completely alone. Melissa had always been the kind of friend who knew exactly what to say, even when I didn't know how to ask for help. She didn't push me to talk about what had happened, and for that I was grateful. We talked about everything else instead: her kids, her job, the book club she had joined last month. It was a small reminder that life went on, even when mine felt like it was falling apart. After we hung up, I felt a little lighter, like some of the weight on my chest had been lifted. I decided to go for a walk, hoping the fresh air would help clear my head. The hotel was near a small park, and I wandered through it aimlessly, watching the joggers and families and couples enjoying the sunny morning. It was strange, seeing so much happiness around me when my own world felt so bleak. But it also gave me hope. If other people could find joy after heartbreak, maybe I could too. As I walked, I thought about what Melissa had said about taking things one day at a time. I didn't have to decide right now whether I was going to forgive him, or whether I was going to walk away for good. I could give myself time to heal, to figure out what I wanted, to rediscover who I was outside of our marriage. For so long I had defined myself as his wife, as part of a team. But now I realized I needed to learn how to stand on my own again. Over the next few days, I focused on myself for the first time in years. I went to a yoga class, something I had always wanted to try but never made time for. I visited a museum, wandering through the quiet halls and losing myself in the beauty of the art. I even started journaling, pouring my thoughts onto the pages in a way that felt cathartic and freeing. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments when the pain hit me like a tidal wave. But slowly I began to feel like I was finding my footing again. Daniel continued to text me, but I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to talk to him yet, and I needed to set boundaries if I was going to move forward. Instead, I focused on the things that made me happy, the things that reminded me of who I was before everything fell apart. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. One evening, as I sat in the hotel room with a cup of tea and my journal, I realized something that surprised me. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel consumed by the betrayal or the hurt. Instead, I felt calm. It was a fragile kind of calm, one that could easily be shattered, but it was there nonetheless. And in that moment, I knew I was going to be okay. I didn't know what the future held, whether I would choose to rebuild my marriage or walk away from it entirely. But for now, I was choosing myself. And that, I realized, was the most important choice of all. The calm didn't mean the pain was gone. It was still there, lurking in the quieter moments, waiting to catch me off guard. A memory would flash. Our wedding day, the way his hands trembled as he slid the ring onto my finger, the way he looked at me like I was his entire world, and it would hit me like a punch to the gut. Or I'd catch a glimpse of a couple holding hands, laughing together, and I'd feel a pang of envy so sharp it took my breath away. But now, instead of drowning in it, I let the feelings wash over me and then drift away. They didn't define me anymore. They were just there. I stayed in the hotel for another week. Each day felt a little easier than the last. I started going to the small cafe around the corner for breakfast, finding comfort in the ritual of ordering the same cup of coffee and the same croissant every morning. I brought a book with me, one I'd been meaning to read for years but never seemed to have the time for. It felt good to do something for myself, to reclaim those little moments of joy that had been overshadowed by the chaos of my marriage. One morning, as I sat by the window with my coffee, I saw a couple arguing on the sidewalk outside. The woman's arms were crossed tightly over her chest, and the man was gesturing wildly, his face red with frustration. For a moment I felt a strange kind of kinship with her. Even though I didn't know her story, I wanted to reach through the glass and tell her that she deserved better, that she didn't have to put up with whatever he was putting her through. But I didn't. Instead, I watched as she turned and walked away, her head held high, leaving him standing there alone. I wondered if that was what I looked like the night I walked out on Daniel. Strong. Resolute. But the truth was I hadn't felt strong in that moment. I had felt broken. Shattered into pieces I wasn't sure I could ever put back together. It wasn't until now, sitting here with my book and my coffee and my newfound sense of peace, that I realized how far I had come. It was later that same day when Melissa called me again. "Hey," she said, her voice bright and warm. "I've got some news." "What kind of news?" I asked, smiling despite myself. "I found this retreat," she said. "It's for women who've been through, well, what you're going through. It's all about healing and self-discovery, and figuring out what you want out of life. I thought it might be good for you." I hesitated, the idea both intriguing and terrifying. "I don't know, Melissa. I'm not really the group therapy type." "It's not therapy," she said quickly. "It's more like a reset button. A chance to step away from everything and focus on yourself for a little while. No pressure, no expectations. Just you." I thought about it for a moment, turning the idea over in my mind. The past few weeks had been a blur of emotions and uncertainty, and the thought of stepping away from it all, even for a little while, was tempting. "Where is it?" I asked. "About 2 hours away," she said. "In the mountains. It's beautiful up there. I've been before, and I think you'd love it." I agreed to think about it, and after we hung up, I spent the rest of the day weighing my options. By the time the sun set, I had made up my mind. I was going to do it. For myself, for my healing, for the chance to find clarity in the midst of all the chaos. The next morning I packed my things and checked out of the hotel. I sent Daniel a brief message, letting him know I'd be out of town for a while, and that I needed more time. He replied almost immediately, asking where I was going and if I was okay, but I didn't respond. This trip wasn't about him. It was about me. The drive to the retreat was peaceful, the highway winding through forests and hills that seemed to stretch on forever. By the time I arrived, I felt a strange sense of anticipation, like I was standing on the edge of something new and unfamiliar. The retreat center was a cluster of cozy cabins nestled among the trees, with a main lodge where meals and workshops were held. The first evening, I sat in a circle with the other women, each of us sharing a little about why we were there. Some had stories that mirrored my own: infidelity, betrayal, the crumbling of a marriage they thought would last forever. Others had different struggles, but the pain in their voices was the same. As I listened, I realized I wasn't alone. My pain wasn't unique, and that thought, instead of making me feel small, made me feel seen. Over the next few days, I threw myself into the experience. I hiked through the woods, feeling the crisp mountain air fill my lungs and clear my mind. I tried yoga and meditation, even though I wasn't very good at either. I wrote in my journal, filling page after page with thoughts and feelings I hadn't been able to articulate before. And slowly I started to feel like myself again. Not the version of myself I had been with Daniel, but the version I had been before, strong, independent, and full of possibilities. By the end of the retreat, I felt lighter than I had in years. I wasn't healed. Not completely, but I was on my way. And for the first time, I felt like I could see a future for myself, one that wasn't defined by what had happened to me, but by what I chose to do next. When I got back to the city, I knew it was time to face Daniel again. This time, though, I wasn't afraid. Whatever happened, I knew I would be okay. I would be more than okay. I would thrive. And that was a kind of freedom I hadn't known I needed. The evening I returned to the city, I didn't go straight to him. I needed one more night to myself, one more evening to sit with the calm I had found, to anchor myself in the person I was becoming. I stayed at a quiet little inn near the park, the same park I had wandered into on the first night after I left him. It felt poetic in a way, like I was coming full circle. The next morning, I woke up early, packed my things and drove to the house. It was strange pulling into the driveway, seeing his car parked in its usual spot, the curtains drawn just as I had left them. For a moment, I sat there in the car, staring at the front door, and wondering what I was going to say. But then I reminded myself that it didn't matter what I said. What mattered was that I was ready to say it. He opened the door almost immediately after I rang the bell, as if he'd been waiting for me. He looked tired, his face drawn and his eyes heavy with worry. "You're back," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper. "I am," I said, stepping inside. The house smelled the same, looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. It felt smaller, heavier, like it carried the weight of everything that had happened within its walls. We sat in the living room, across from each other, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. Finally, I took a deep breath and spoke. "I've had time to think," I said. "About us, about what happened, about what I want. And I've made a decision." His hands were clasped tightly in his lap, his knuckles white. He didn't say anything, just nodded, waiting for me to continue. "I can't stay in this marriage," I said, the words coming out steadier than I expected. "I've tried to imagine a way forward, a way to rebuild the trust that's been broken. But every time I think about it, I realize I'd be betraying myself if I stayed. I deserve more than this. More than you were willing to give me." His face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought he might argue, might beg me to reconsider. But instead he nodded, his eyes shining with tears. "I understand," he said, his voice thick. "I don't want to lose you, but I understand." For the first time, I believed him. There was no defensiveness in his tone, no excuses, no empty promises. Just acceptance. And that made it easier somehow. We spent the next hour talking through the practicalities, dividing the house, the accounts, the pieces of our life that had once been so entwined. It was painful, but it was also freeing. By the time I walked out of the house, I felt lighter, like I had shed a skin that no longer fit. In the weeks that followed, I focused on building a new life for myself. I found a small apartment downtown, close to the cafe I had grown to love. I started taking evening classes in photography, something I had always been interested in, but never made time for. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years, building a support system that reminded me I wasn't alone. As for Daniel, we kept things civil. There were moments of sadness, moments where I caught myself wondering what could have been if things had gone differently. But those moments grew fewer and farther between as the months went on. I didn't hate him, and I didn't wish him ill. I simply knew that our chapter had come to an end. One afternoon, as I walked through the park with my camera slung over my shoulder, I noticed a couple sitting on a bench. They were laughing, their heads close together, their hands intertwined. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of longing, but it was quickly replaced by something else. Hope. Because I knew that one day, I'd have that again. Love, trust, joy, it was all still out there waiting for me. But this time, I'd find it on my own terms. And until then, I was content to keep walking, one step at a time, into the life I was creating for myself.